I'm Rob Skinner, and this is the Rob Skinner Podcast. Today on episode 88, I talked to James Thomas from London, England. James is a disciple, architect, and ultramarathon athlete. He's built opera houses, towers, and buildings all over the world while serving as a leader in the London church. He's run races over 200 miles and has helped his kids follow Christ. Last year, his small group helped 3 couples become Christians. Listen as he shares how to keep your passion for Christ and life going and growing your entire life. How to stay close to your kids and inspire them to follow Christ. How to excel in your work and not lose your family or your faith. How to live a no regrets life and make this life count. All this and more on the Rob Skinner Podcast. Welcome back to the Rob Skinner Podcast. My goal is to inspire you to live a no regrets life, to make this life count, and to multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Today on my program, I have an old friend from 30 years ago, and that's James Thomas. He's a disciple now living in London, England, with his wife, and he's got 2 kids. And James and I knew each other when I was the church leader in Seattle, Washington, back in 1992 and 1993. He was a student at the University of Washington, and we've kept in touch over the years, especially the last couple years, and it's been very inspiring to me to catch up and see what this man has been doing with his life, his marriage, his family, his career, and the way that he's making this life count. James, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Rob. Good to be here.
It seems like a time warp because when I knew you before, you had long, curly, blonde hair, and you were just a crazy young college student, just fired up, and now you're in your early 50s.
Yeah, the years do go by, don't they?
They do. It's crazy. Well, if you could just share with us, how did you become a Christian?
Right. So I had some faith growing up at Church of England, and then I'd started kind of seeking at a quite a young age, but in a very hypocritical way. And I'd gone along to gone along to the church camps as a teenager, and then I'd gone along to a big mission and prayed Jesus into my heart at 15, I think, and then from then I just kind of wandered from church to church, and I think in some ways I had a good heart, and I thought I was a Christian, and I knew my Bible quite well, but it was, definitely Sunday morning I would find a local church and I'd turn up there, and no matter what I'd been doing on Saturday night, and that had gone on from 15 till I was 23, and inside, it wasn't good. And I just been traveling. I'd been 26 months in Japan working. And then I'd gone out to visit my girlfriend who'd been out in Kenya. And that had just fallen apart. And she dumped me on my birthday, my 23rd birthday. And it was my fault, totally. And I just remember going out into the desert, it was in northern Kenya, and praying, God, I'm so far from you, but I want you. And like a month later, I arrived into New York, and then a Greyhound across America. And just like the next day, I was getting off a bus in the University Quarter, and 2 guys, Walter Stanford and Angelo Pancho, invited me off the bus. And I had these tiger print MC Hammer pants on and a Godzilla little rucksack, and they invited me, and I said, sure, I'm looking for a church. And so they invited me, and I went straight in that evening to a brother's student ministry dinner, and I was instantly amazed. I mean, I haven't seen so many churches. And then came to church on Sunday, and I put my hand up and said I want to be baptized. And I studied Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and was baptized the following Sunday. And that was 29 years ago.
That's crazy. What was the date on that?
13th of October, 91.
1991. Wow, that was okay. That was just a few months before Pam and I arrived there. And did you graduate from the University of Washington?
I had a degree already, and I was on exchange doing a master's in architecture.
I see.
So I went back. So you led not just the Seattle Church of Christ, but you also led the UW ministry. So you were, that was good days. I remember eating, being introduced to pancakes on your living room floor, maple syrup. And I went back to England, and I was part of a church plant in Liverpool, where I finished off.
Oh, so you're part of a mission planting then?
Yeah. It was funny. There were already a couple of students there, and I went back and joined them, and God was amazing. And 3 or 4 became 17, and then they said, "Oh, well, let's make it a church." So then I was part of a church planting by the following summer, by the summer of 92.
That's amazing. Okay, so tell me, how long have you been married, and how'd you meet your wife?
So after that, I came down to London the following year. So I'd kind of come back from America and then come down from Liverpool when I finished my master's. And then my wife, Amanda, had just been, she was invited in Sydney, Australia. We're both Londoners. Well, she's kind of Essex, actually, the edge of London. She wouldn't like being called a Londoner. But she and I kind of walked into the same church sector of the London Church of Christ, Southeast, in probably early 93. And I saw her and across the room as she came in, and we talked at the end of the church service, and we talked and talked and talked and talked, and suddenly we looked around and we were the only 2 people left in the car park. And we went on a date a month or 2 later. She was booked out for lots of dates, so I had to wait. And then we got engaged. We started dating a few months later, and in November 95, we got married. So that's 25 years ago, last November.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. Yes.
And now you've got a couple kids.
I do. So we have JJ, who's 21, and he's a disciple. He's part of the London student ministry, and he leads a Bible talk, and he's a musician. He leads the band in one of the in the sector where the London student ministry. He's very talented. And I have a daughter. And I have a wonderful daughter who's a very good-hearted daughter, Millie, who's 17, and she's been a disciple a couple of years.
Wow. One thing that just in reconnecting with you, James, is the work that you're doing, plus this, you're all involved in ultra runs and crazy stuff. And I just go, your kids are disciples, you're spiritual, you're strong, and you're really succeeding at your work. Can you tell me a little bit about your work, what you're doing, and some of the things that you've done?
Sure. Yeah, and I suppose, I think I kind of had a sense that I wanted a lot from life, and I wanted a lot from life before as a Christian. And then when I got introduced to the church, I just saw these people who had such rich lives. That student ministry back in Seattle, just amazing. And that verse, John 10:10, where Jesus talks about, I come to you have life and life to the full. And I wanted a full life. And what I saw was, I think, take hold of that, that you can have this incredible life. So I'd been studying architecture. And actually, I wasn't a very good architect. I really wasn't. And I like my university professors told me, we really don't think you should be doing it. You should do whatever else. But I kept going at it, and so God has been good, because I've I've ended up working for some of the the best firms. So Norman Foster, Lord Foster, he's probably the most successful architect in the last 30 years. So with him, I worked on Beijing Airport, which is the biggest building in the world. And we worked on the World Trade Center competition, which was pretty epic. Then I did a startup, which sort of went okay, but that not quite so okay. I worked on a nuclear power station, did a master plan for a 15 billion pound nuclear power station, which then I've done an opera house in Morocco for the King of Morocco. So that was a lot of fun. And my dad also is an architect, and he did work on Sydney Opera House, so as an architect. So it was very nice that he could do Sydney Opera House, and then I could be doing a very similar opera house for the King of Morocco. And it was great to meet the King. And I was asked to do the ceremony and meet the King of Morocco and present the project to him. So that was, and then I've just finished a residential skyscraper, the first skyscraper I've worked on. So it's been fun. And I've got a nice home as well. I've rebuilt a 1929 home, and have straw bale construction. I'm quite into environmental things, so straw bale construction, the new build, and green meadow grass roofs, and it's built around a living tree. So that's fun.
Wow. Okay, so tell me a little bit about that house. Like, how did you come up with the design?
I think the design is, when it says that there's nothing new under the sun, I think, as an architect, you kind of go places, and you see things you like, and then you take them in. And actually living and working in Japan had a huge influence on me as a young man. There were lots of different things, design influences I want to incorporate. This environmental design. I feel like God did make us to look after this earth, right. And so we need to design in a greener way. And so using straw bale and not cutting down these ancient fruit trees, but building the new construction around them was really important. And then there were some kind of fundamental things, practical things. My wife has got a hip issue. She's born with a congenital hip. So I wanted to make sure that there weren't any. So there's a lift. We put a new lift into the house in 1929. She doesn't need it. She's great, but I just wanted to make sure that was there for her, and that we'd have a granny room as well, so that grandparents, if they ever, when they come, they can have a lift and they can get through. So it was all these things, and I guess I've been doing architecture for a long time, and I got some tracing paper, and I sketched for 5 years, and my son said, "Come on, Dad, when are you going to start doing it?" And eventually I said, "Okay, this is it." We found a builder, and we did it.
Now I've heard that land in London is some of the most expensive. I mean, houses, one of the most expensive in the world. How did you ever to find a piece of property? Did you tear down an existing building, or?
Yeah. The front half of the house is 1929. And I kind of like that you got this historic part, that you look at the house on the outside and it looks 1929. And then you open the front door and it still looks like you've walked back into 1929. And then you go to the end of the first corridor and you open the door, and then, whoa, okay, this is not 1929. This is 21st century. Lots of glass and timber and straw and green roofs and trees and things like that. So that was fun.
Wow. I look forward to seeing it at some point. That'll be great. I sold houses. I was a realtor for about 8 years while I led a small church in Oregon. And so whenever I talk about people's houses, I can't even go into people's houses without looking in every room. They must think I'm the most nosy person in the world, but I still find houses very, very interesting. Let's switch subjects and talk about another aspect of excellence in your life, and that is you've gotten into ultra endurance events. Can you share a little bit about how you got into that and some of the events that you participated in?
Sure. So even as a kind of young disciple, I kind of love the kind of comradeship of disciples doing sports together back in Seattle, going out and trying to learn how to play American football, tag, and not having a clue. And I came back to London and we did, a bit of mountain biking and then we played soccer together and rugby. And there were some really great teams and that was great. And I continued doing that. And then when JJ, my first son came along, I kind of didn't really have time. So I kind of got into running instead, which actually I'm much better as a runner. And I did that and I run, and Mark Templer, who led the church in London, was into running as well. So that was nice. So and I ran London Marathon and New York Marathon and then London again. But I got sick of it and I was doing it on my own and I didn't have anyone to run with. And this was 2003 and some other things were happening as well. And so I finished the London Marathon and I got the time I wanted and I stopped and I really stopped. And I put on 45 pounds in 8 months. I didn't, I just went from quite light and skinny and a runner and I just I thought I was great and I just thought I was eating well and but I was not doing well. And it took me 10 years before my kids kind of said, Dad, they had a song about me being fat and about my belly. And it was sort of out of the mouth of babes, but it was helpful. They spoke the truth, maybe not sort of in love to me. And I started, and I moved out and a brother who lives nearby said, hey, James, you used to run. Why don't you come and do this event with me? And this event was a 24-hour race through the Lake District, through the mountains. And I guess I still thought I was this marathon runner, and I thought that the 40 pounds were not there. And I lost a few of them, but not maybe 10. And I went and did this event and I just self-destruct and I got slower and slower. And in the end, they left me. and I ended up in, it's a 24-hour cutoff. And I finished the race more or less on my hands and knees in 30 hours.
Oh my gosh.
On my own, out of water and in so much pain. And I had to finish it because I'd raised money. I was raising money for Hope. So it was like, I can't not do it. So that was then. And that was like 10 years ago. Just gone 10 years ago. And I didn't do anything for a few years. And then my son said, hey, Dad, why don't we do something together? And he was 13. So we came up with an idea of doing a race and it was a bit shorter. And then the next year we did again a 24-hour mountain race, not quite as long. And he was 14 and he did it. I mean, it was hard for both of us. We were both, but we did it. And then the next year we did it again and he got hypothermia.
Oh my gosh.
And so on the way back, he said, hey, Dad, that wasn't great. Can we do triathlon instead? So now what I do is I do ultra running sort of in the winter months. And then I do triathlon in the summer months. So so I have this friend, Pete, who's a brother, a best friend who lives a couple of miles ago. We went for a run this morning together, we did 10K. And we did a race across Exmoor and Dartmoor. It's 106 miles. We did it nonstop. And it was a storm started just as we were starting in April. And it started just raining and it rained nonstop until the rain turned to snow and then to a blizzard. And we just kept on going. And that was really brutal. And then a year and a half ago, we did a race down the length of Wales. So that was 210 miles. And the elevation, it was like climbing Everest twice. That's 5 days. So yeah.
Oh my gosh. You and your buddy Pete ran 106 miles consecutive, just straight out.
Yeah, so that was 38 hours. We got a 2 half-hour sleeps on the way, but it was nonstop.
That's like 4 marathons.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh my gosh. You must have been a mess after that was done.
yeah. I It's funny thing. Pete's feet were pretty bad at one point. So he went through a lot of pain. And it wasn't much fun kind of tidying up his feet either, but that was kind of Jesus like. Um, but there's a point you go through, like on the second night, where it's pitch black, it's this blizzard, you're freezing cold, you've been going so long, and actually I started hallucinating just from the sleep deprivation. And I remember looking up, and I saw this massive cat, like 30-foot high cat, smiling, a Cheshire cat from Alice in Wonderland. And I'm like, okay, that's probably not really there, is it? And but yeah, so, and actually after that I felt great.
In terms of your running, like, have you had any like close calls? Any times you passed out? Any scary situations?
Yeah, and more towards the start. I think I'm grown a little bit wiser, as hopefully, actually I'm not even sure if that's true. So on that first run where my friend Pete said, James, come along to this, and I did not train properly, and I didn't have the right gear, and I ended up on on my own on top of a mountain in the Lake District, and I had no water left, and the sun was setting, and my battery, my torch were running down, and eventually just quit. And I just had a kind of a map on my phone, and the battery of my phone ran down, and then I had this paper map, but I couldn't see it because and I was just stumbling on my own in the dark on a mountain. And at one point, I fell off a small, but it was a cliff. I did fall off a small cliff in the dark, and it was just crazy. And I look back at everything, that was absolutely, that wasn't wise.
Right.
I've made some better decisions since then, and some other ones as well. Is that? But there's quite a few other stories like that as well. So.
No, it's good to get back into shape, but I mean, there's a big difference between getting back into shape, wanting to lose a few pounds, and then running 106 miles or 210 miles. I mean, why? Just can you explain why?
I, why? I suppose, I mean, it's part of it that you run a 5K, and then when you've done that, you run a 10K, and then you run a half, and then you run a marathon, and then you run a few. And I've run I've run 7 marathons. And then there's more, but I think there is a bit more than that, which is that I think it's really good I like to see where my limits are, and how far I can push. And what's quite and I know I learn a lot from that when I push myself further than I think I can go, then actually I have to rely on God, and he often gives me more. I do all of these things, and I do all these things with other people as well. And I love the comradeship, that I have with me and my friend Pete, or with me and my son, JJ, when we do these things, we do them together. And, that example I gave of going through the night with my friend Pete, there was a bit early on, I was really, really struggling. And Pete was saying to me, James, we need to hurry up, and we need to hurry up. And I said, Pete, I can't go any faster. Please stop telling me to go. I can't do it. And thankfully, he just shut his mouth. And what he did was, every fence we got to, and there's a lot of fences, he just ran ahead, and he opened the gate for me. And then I ran through it slowly, and then he shut the gate, and then he just let me. And then, and then later on, I was saying that his feet fell apart, and like 20 hours later, he was lying there, and I was, picking out the blisters on his feet and bandaging them and doing that. And so you kind of meet each other's needs, and
Wow.
that's really, it's great.
Now that's amazing. I ran a marathon one time, and there was a feeling of accomplishment, like, okay, it's amazing what your body can do, that you can do more than you think, and you can train up to almost anything, which is really impressive. It must give you a great sense of accomplishment.
Yeah, there is that. And I look back, and believe me, I was really, really not an athlete at school. I ran one time for the school, in the London schools, cross country, and I came second to last out of 250 people. So when I met, I had a school reunion a couple of years ago, and a couple of the guys followed me on a thing called Strava, which is an app, and they just like, what happened? I was this kind of really small, puny kid who was right at the back and the last one to be picked, and then I line up, like a couple of years ago, I got to run Boston Marathon.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and it was just like, it's like when you line up at Boston, it's just incredible. And it was a really good experience. And we went out with my wife, my daughter. We had 2 weeks. We stayed with JC and Shyla, who lead the church in Syracuse, and then a sister, Akira, who lives up in Montreal. And then we went down afterwards to Florida, to Virginia with Corey and Angela Stark. And but this fantastic trip. But in the middle of it was the Boston Marathon. And I don't think I'd realized what a big thing the Boston Marathon was, on Patriots Day,
right.
The day that the Americans got independence or started the fight. That's an odd thing to be an Englishman in Boston on running the Boston Marathon on Patriots Day.
That must be odd.
It was good.
But you have to qualify for Boston. I mean, you have to do qualifying marathons and get a certain time. What was your qualifying time to get into the Boston?
Yeah, it was pretty. I had to run I knew exactly what I needed to run, and it was. As a 50-year-old man, I had to run 3 hours 24, and I ran 3 hours 23 and 40 seconds. And I had nothing left at all. It was just, but I like that. I like the sense that you, a verse which I'm really into at the moment is 1 Corinthians 9. It talks about going into strict training, that, if you compete in the games, you don't beat your body aimlessly. You go into strict training. And right now I'm training for another marathon at the moment, and I'm following a guide, a Hanson marathon guide. And each day I have a run to do, and 3 of those runs in particular, so 6, and I have a distance to run and a speed to run, and I do that strict training. And I think that's really helpful for me in the rest of my life as well. I try and do that in every part of my life, is to go into strict training.
Okay, so
and then I hunt around to find people who will do all of those things with me.
So when you say you have a guide, do you have someone who's running with you, setting the pace for you?
What I have above my desk, I have a list of about 20 friends who all live near me, and they all run. And some of them are Christians, and some of them are not Christians. And some of them are faster than me, and some of them about the same pace, and some of them are slow. And on a Sunday night or a Monday morning, I'll message out and I'll plan the week. And I'll do 6 runs in a week, and 3 of those are really fast runs. And I'll tend to pick people who are faster than me, and I'll say, hey, Ollie. Hey, to these friends of mine, my friend Ollie, he runs for GB. He's like 4th in the world at 50 kilometers last year.
Oh my gosh.
And so it's a slow run for him. It's a really fast run. So he's chatting away and talking away. And I can say some words on the downhill, and on the uphill, I'm just. But he'll, so. We'll do so I'll say to him, hey, can we do 16K at 4:35 per K pace.
Oh my
And he'll go,
gosh.
fine, do it.
And he's just talking freely and relaxing, just chatting it up, and you're just barely keeping your wind.
Oh, absolutely. Like this last weekend, he did an event, a World Unity Run. It's some kind of COVID thing. So they had runners from all over the world, and he's one of about 15 runners from the UK, and he was running for 6 hours. How far you can run? And he actually came first in the UK. He ran 52 miles in 6 hours, which is it's ludicrous. It's
That's
like,
amazing.
so he's like, yeah. So he ran a double. So he ran 2 sub-3 hour marathons back to back.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
there is always somebody faster than you.
Right.
But,
so you've kind of entered into this community of ultramarathoners and distance runners.
yeah.
Was that
Yes, I have.
was that gradual? Was that intentional? Accidental?
Yeah, sort of accidental, and then more. I've tried out different things, and I find things I like more. I do try and make the rule. I have some rules for that. So I try and make the number one thing about relationships. Relationships with fellow Christians and relationships with non-Christians and friends, and that. So I won't do an event just because I fancy the sound of an event. So the first one's about, I'll do an event because other people are wanting, a friend of mine wants to do it. So, but fortunately, there are other people who are like-minded on that. So there's a friend, Twambo, who leads the church in Lusaka, Zambia. And I've been doing some work with them as an architect with the church and with the charity. But Twambo has also run something called Comrades, which is the biggest ultra marathon in the world. And it's 89 kilometers. He ran it a couple of years ago. So next year, Twambo, I'm going to go out to South Africa and Zambia and do some work with the architecture with Twambo for Hope and the church. And they're building a new church out there and building some Hope facilities. And then we're going to go down to South Africa and we're going to do this crazy 20,000 people running 89 kilometers. That's like 56 miles from one city to the other. And Rambo's just a fantastic guy, and I get the opportunity to do that. Yeah. So if there's another, I said that Don Downs was the guy who studied the Bible and baptized me back in Seattle.
Right.
So come next year, we're going off to the conference. My wife and kids are going off to the conference in Florida, and Don loves climbing 14,000 foot mountains. So after the conference, Don and I are going to go and climb a 14,000 foot mountain together. And so
now, I know Don and Vonda. Now, are there any mountains in Florida?
No, most of them seem to be in Colorado, where he's from. So
okay.
we'll do a road trip.
I see. Got it. That's cool. That's great. Yeah. Tell me, how do you? I'm sure there are people wondering, like, how do you do that time-wise? You've got this thriving architectural business that you're doing. You're really involved in church. You've got strong relationships in the body. And then you've got this training regimen. I mean, just the time itself must be crazy. I mean, do you get any sleep? How do you manage your schedule?
I mean, honestly, COVID has been fantastic. So for the last year, I've been working from home. And I'll go do a site visit once a week or 2 weeks. But I do nearly all my runs, which are either in the morning before work or at lunchtime. So I'll and like I say, I've got a gathering, and it's a lot about relationships as well. So the guy who disciples me, we go for a run together, and that's our time together. And there's a young guy, and we go out and we go for a long walk together. So my son, we spend time together. We went for a run on Monday together. And usually, if I'm spending time with my son or lots of these people, I'll do the run and then we'll get a coffee afterwards. But so I mean, there's a bit about that thing, strict training, combining it and being disciplined with time. But I find that making it about relationships, about spending time with people, and then figuring out who and when and what speed and those kind of things works.
That's awesome. Your kids are following Christ. Congratulations. That's awesome. What's helped you as a parent?
That's a good question. I think I made lots of bad mistakes. And but I do think that God has knocked on my door and told me that I'm making some bad mistakes. And I think hopefully I've listened to those things. So, and I think there's some big structural things that we did at different times where things were not going well. And I do see that my prime need is my number one job in life is to get my wife to heaven, holy and perfect. And after that, my number two job is to get my kids to heaven. As for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. That's our family motto. It's written in Latin over the beam. It's on our signet ring. It's under the thing. So, but to answer, so the big things were, there was a time when I was working abroad an awful lot, and I was away way too much. I went to Morocco 40 times in 4 years, and it's like a week trip. And I was going to Algeria, and I was going to Beirut at the same time. And exotic though some of that was, and it was pretty good for my surfing as well. It was the surf in Morocco is excellent, by the way. It wasn't great for my family, and then things happened, and God and the woman who owned the company died, and the project didn't actually need me going there anymore. And so I looked around, and I made a decision to take a job where the work's in London, and I could work a normal 40-hour week as opposed to a lot more than that. And that was for my kids, number one. I think, when my son said to me that day, "Hey Dad, can we do triathlon together?" I didn't want to do triathlon. It was expensive, and I'm a rubbish swimmer. But there's my son, aged 15, wanting to do something with me. And he said, we're in the car, and I bit my tongue, and I said, thought for a few seconds, I said, "Sure, son, that'd be great." And that was really good for us. When we lived in a place where there were no other families, and we were looking, and I was looking at I wanted to buy a field and build this dream modern house, and God felt like it was saying no to that. And instead, a guy came to a Bible talk we were having at one Christmas. Guy from America just happened to be passing through, and he said that in his church they encourage people to live on the same street with other families if they can. And I listened to that, and it felt like God was talking to me. And so instead of buying a field and building this kind of glorious modern house somewhere, we moved to the place where there were the most other Christians with families, and that was great. And so all of our kids became Christians, one after the other.
Wow.
So does that answer it? I think
absolutely.
Lots of mistakes, but when I'd made mistakes, really making big decisions to put them first.
Any advice to those who want to be better parents, feel like, man, I want to make right decisions? You shared something there, making the big decisions, making the hard decisions. Anything else?
I think the most important thing is to spend time one-on-one with them. I got that advice. I went to the church put on a parenting class, and a great class. John Louis did it originally, and Adrian Hill taught it, and it was great. And he just went, but the key thing was so every week I'll spend time with one of my kids one-on-one, and we'll spend time. And I've done that since they were like 2. and so we have a great relationship, and that's such a simple thing to do, but it's really easy. The other thing is I think be open to what they want to do, especially when it's spiritual stuff. So my daughter came up to me and said, "Dad, there's a conference in America. We need to go." And I'm like, yeah, sure. Okay. And I wanted to go. I needed to. And anyway, I didn't do anything. And she reminded me about it. Millie, she was 15, and she reminded me about it. And eventually she got sick of it. So I was lying in bed, half asleep, and she came up with her laptop and my wallet, and she logged on to the website, and she said, "Dad, this is the credit card, isn't it?" And I said, yeah. And she typed in the credit card number, and she logged me and us all on to go to the conference. And what can I say? If your daughter wants to go to the kind of church conference, be around hundreds, thousands and thousands of other Christian teens, then you do it. Yeah. My son wanted to go off on the Hope Youth Corps, and so that was a bit of money, but it was like, okay, that's worth sacrifice.
Right.
Spiritual things are worth really putting first. Right.
Now you've talking about your past. 2003, you shared that you had actually led a part of the London church. Can you share with me? I mean, you've been doing a lot of different things. Share with me what happened there around 2003.
Yeah, 2003 was quite hard. I mean, in lots of places, and I mean, there were maybe things that needed change, but it was really hard, and very hard on a lot of people. And the particular sector we're in had some great staff members, but for various reasons, in 2003 they all left, and partly because we weren't paying any of them, which is good reason. So there was a group of people who were mainly Bible talk leaders who came in, and we really didn't know what we were doing, and that whittled down quite quickly, and it ended up being mainly a guy, Rubik Lucian, and myself for many years, who led the church, and it was great. It was a fantastic experience to do it, and also at that time it was fantastic to the church did split. Mohan talked about it in your recent podcast about it split into different congregations. And it was a lot of work with a number of people to bring it back together into one church. And Mohan's done a fantastic job. I have many others to strive for unity for that.
He shared that it had split up into 9 different groups, and that Malcolm Cox was instrumental in pulling it all back together.
Yeah, it was. We had these meetings. Originally, it was called the London Unity Group, and I've got to admit, the one thing it wasn't particularly was unified to start with.
That was more of an aspiration than a reality.
Yes, huh? It was. It was a lofty goal. But Malcolm was a very calm and loyal, and brought a sense, and we sung and we prayed, and I loved that group, and there were great people like Tokes and Charles Elique, and then Mohan came back from India, and I love those guys so much, and they really fought, we all did, for unity. And there are other people who came in from outside, Mike Fontenot, John Louis as well, the two of those particularly were really helpful to outside. Yeah, good. And it's amazing to see how different things are now. I look back, it's miraculous.
It is miraculous. And it's interesting because I remember at the time hearing stories from London, and London was one of the most hard hit churches in the kingdom. I mean, it was just sounded crazy from the outside. Being there on the inside from the beginning to the end, is there anything that you go, boy, if we could have done things a little differently, we would have done this? What if you could just go back and try to guide things in a different direction, what would you do differently, if
Uh,
anything?
I, uh, well, I think I heard stories. Mike Fontenot helped a lot, like I say, and I heard stories from Virginia, and I visited Virginia since. And Virginia, it sounds like they had an eldership, and a practice in eldership. And I think at that particular time when things went crazy, I think having an eldership, stronger eldership, would have helped as a kind of intermediary a bit. I think and I think that's a call for people to raise up and you know and do that. I think there were and too many people who kept quiet, because it became a kind of evangelist versus ministry thing, and there was a split, and that was crazy. And I think enough and more people, more Bible talk leaders, more people who've been Christians a long time should have stood up and said, "This is wrong," and the ministers aren't the enemy here. Satan's the enemy here. This is really wrong. People shouting at each other and screaming and running around is this isn't whatever things have gone wrong. This isn't the way to deal with it. And I wish I'd have stood up more. And I wish other people, had been Christians a while, and leaders of one form or another, or strong Christian men should have stood up. I mean, it's like when God says, I look for someone to stand in the gap. I couldn't find anyone.
Right.
There weren't enough people to stand in the gap.
A lot of people left at that time. You chose not to. What helped you to just stand firm and keep plugging away?
That's a good question. I had a great godly wife. This really helps. I think I kept busy. I saw I think it really helped me to actually become part of that leadership group, because there was a need. There was such a need. The Riverside went from 330 down to about 100 in 6 months. I mean, and it was just tearing itself apart. And there was such a need for people to, on every different level, so there was a need. I had preached like once before then, and suddenly I needed to kind of come up with a sermon like once every 3 weeks or something, and do classes, and then you got rid of all the Bible discussions, and then we set one up, and it was so it was just good to be busy.
Yeah.
I think that probably more than anything, it was just there is work to do. We're unworthy servants. Let's serve and do stuff. And when you do that, some of the other bigger things become, some of the complaints and things are less important.
When you look back on your Christian life, what surprised you along the way? What did you not see coming?
I didn't think it would be as good. I thought I was looking for forgiveness of sin, to not be such a bad person, and I wanted to go to heaven. And I kind of thought, okay, this is going to be working hard for God, and then I'm going to get to heaven. It's going to be brilliant. But boy, that thing, life to the full. I can't believe. I mean, how many good things have happened on the way, and God's just given not just good stuff, but like the crazy, overwhelming dreams of my heart. Not just marrying the woman of my dreams and having these amazing kids, and having this incredible relationship with my children, but but all kinds of little things as well. Like my dad worked on Sydney Opera House, an architect who worked on Sydney Opera House. And then what does God give me? He gives me an opera house in Morocco, a fantastic opera. It's just been finished now. You can Google it. The Rabat Grand Theatre, King Mohammed VI. It's incredible. And that's just like, that's a crazy thing. You couldn't plan that. And, like going off and standing at the start line at Boston and getting that, one of the worst athletes in my school getting to do that. I just think, and I was so nervous speaking, in my English, I had to do a presentation, and I was the one that just got laughed down and be turned from that to somebody who's, I've spoken in front of the London church, 1,000 people, and it's like, it's amazing, so much more than I could possibly hope or imagine.
Wow.
That surprises me.
When you look back, do you have any touchstones or acts of God that have reinforced your faith in his power?
Well, some of those things I talked about are good, but I think it's a good question. I think the really big touchstones are where I was at my last struggling and at my wit's end, and I didn't know what the solution was, and I couldn't see anything, and all I could do was go out and pray to God. So I talked about that when before I was a Christian, when I went out into the desert in Kenya, and I prayed to God I could find him, and like a month later, and invited off a church. So that's, to me, miraculous. But there are other things, like when I met Amanda and fell in love, she had this hip issue, a congenital hip problem, and I loved her, and I realized as we were going out, her health was really not good, and I made we wrote our vows together, and I wrote a vow that I will make you well and keep you well. Oh. And Amanda didn't like me writing that, and I had no idea, and it was crazy, and everyone questioned me about it, but I did that, and it's miraculous. She a couple of years after we got married, she had a hip replacement, and that was great. And we've done so we took up swimming. We did Kung Fu together for about 8 years, and that was good. And then about 5 years ago, we took up swimming together, and she's an incredible swimmer now. So we did a combined 5K with the kids swim, and she can easily do 2K swim just like that. She's and we do Pilates together as well, and her health now is amazing. She is that's miraculous to me. But that hope that I had is amazing. And then I think another one, which is really big, is about where the church was back in 2003 and past that, and my kids with that, because I just saw the church shrinking each year. I had to kind of keep track of the membership, and every year it was smaller than the year before, and what was worse than that was that every year kids would go up into what the sort of was a teen ministry, and they didn't want to be part of it, and it was always an effort, and they didn't become Christians, or they did become Christians, didn't stay. And in all those years, there's only one child who became a Christian and stayed a Christian, and that was my friend Rubik's daughter. And my own son didn't want to be at church, and he was like, and he would say, I don't know if I believe in God. I don't think he really believed that, but he really didn't want to be in church. And I was like, this is terrible, and this is not right. And I just prayed about it, and then God sorted it out. And Corey and Angela Stark came over. They're just master church builders, and we merged the 3 little congregations together, and the church just immediately just turned around and got this great teen ministry, and all these kids I was talking about who live around here all started becoming Christians, and then my son became a Christian, and my daughter, and now, if I compare that bleak moment I had back in the whatever it was, 2006, 2007, when the church was so down, and I just couldn't see a solution.
Mm.
It was just getting worse to what the situation now. That makes me, it's God. That's special.
Yeah. It makes me think of coming out of COVID and a lot of people that are really down. I've certainly had my challenges, just feeling like, man, this is such a challenging time. And yet what I see there is your perseverance was rewarded, and God came through from those dark days. And it's so inspiring because the church is doing so well in London now, and people like you have stood firm when it would have been easy to leave, and many did. When you go ahead, you're about to say something.
Yeah, it's so, I can't describe to you. I was just overflowing with how good things are now. And I mean, we're part of a Bible talk. We don't lead it, but we help out. And it's just reminding me how different things are. You know, we didn't see any baptisms back then, but in the last 2 years, we've had six people, 3 couples have got baptized and a part of the Bible talk. So the Bible talk's doubled in the last 3 years, and we got a Korean couple who are fantastic accountants, and a young couple, Fergal and Izzy, and just recently Trevor and Jade, Terry and Jade as well. And it's just and other people, Fergal's sister, Fergal's youngest sister. So just to see baptisms happening all over the place as well, it's just incredible from what it was just 10 years ago.
Going back to your wife, Amanda, when you got married, you said, "I'm going to make you well, and I'm going to keep you well." That's what you promised her. You made a vow. And so at the time that you got married, her hip was so bad she couldn't walk, or there was a danger that she may lose her mobility.
Yeah, it's hard. And she's a woman who never complains. But you know, when you get to know somebody better, you start seeing more and more. And I made some bad mistakes. I arranged a date where I thought we were parking right next to the restaurant and it'd be a little walk, and it ended up being like 2 or 3 miles, and that's really hard for her to walk that far. And she had a stick, but she tried not to use it. And she'd rest up all day just so she could come on a date with me on a Saturday, you know, when we were going out. And it was getting worse. You know, she thought she'd end up in a wheelchair. So that was hard.
That's inspiring, though. You made that promise, and then now she can swim, she can walk. That's amazing. Yeah. So inspiring. It's totally God's power. When you think about your life, and this is why I wanted to talk to you, James, because you're successful in your career, in your architecture. You're developing great buildings, and that's amazing. In your personal life, you're doing amazing things with your ultra marathoning. Your private life, your relationship life, is your kids are Christians. You've got a great marriage. You've got a loving long-term marriage in the face of challenges. And spiritually, you're bearing fruit. You've gone through tough times and held on. It's very inspiring when you look at the complete picture. When you think about your life, what does it mean to you to live a no regrets life?
If you want to have a no regrets life, you need to keep a vision and a willingness to do things which are you're not particularly sure whether you can do. And I think to have a confidence in a loving Father, that He wants to give you, you know, the desires of your heart, and more. You know, so when my son said to me, being a dad helps a lot because it helps me know how much God loves me because I love my kid. So when my son said to me in that car, do you want to, let's do triathlon together. And I didn't want to do it, but I said, yeah. And I threw everything into that. And that was amazing. You know, when we finished the Italy Ironman together, and he was 18 and that was incredible. I'm so glad for that. But God, you know, I think it's a sense of adventure and keeping that going. I don't, you know, so many Christians and so many Bible characters don't end up well. And the people that inspire me are, you know, are Caleb, who you know, when he's 85, who's like, give me the hill country, or Paul, who's you know, he's in jail and he's writing letters and he's preaching to the guards and people are come, and I want that as I've made so many mistakes in the past, and I want, as I get older, to hopefully make less mistakes, but still to be bold and to try new things. So, you know, at the moment, I'm trying. There's a call for teachers to raise up. We haven't got a teaching ministry really in the UK, and we need it. We need to have some teachers. So that's something which I'm looking at and I'm working at. And I came off the call before this to a guy, Simon Dinning, who's sort of the main guy here, and I've asked him to mentor me in that, and Mohan's kind of encouraging me as well. And so I'm going full into that, you know, and let's give it a go, and develop that and being fresh. And I think actually, you know, the sport and the running kind of helps me in that kind of way. You know, I got a marathon next week in a week's time, and I'm going for a PB. I'm going to try and take 10 minutes off my time, and I've been training for it really hard. And I think you train for something, go into strict training and you go for it, you push for it, and maybe you make it, and maybe you go down in flames. And but it's more fun trying for that, you know. So like maybe the teaching doesn't work out, you know, but something else will, because I got a loving dad who wants to give me more than I could possibly imagine. But if I don't try something, if I don't give something a go, you know, no one's holding me back. You know, only I'm holding me back. Right. So that's a no regrets life. Wow. That's, you know, trying crazy stuff and heck.
Right. What is your current personal best in the marathon?
I was at 3:23.
Oh my gosh.
I ran to get Boston. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
So any final words, any advice for a person who's listening, and whether they want to succeed in a secular career like you've done, or they want to do ministry, but they know for sure they want to make this life count. They want to squeeze as much as possible out of this life before heaven. Any advice that you would give them? Any words of encouragement?
There's a young guy who is kind of struggling with his faith at the moment, but because he's focusing too much on his work, and I mean, it might make me think of that when you said that. I think, you know, God gives us in the Bible and with Christians and all the answers of how to live life and to be successful. You know, it's the same. It's the same thing if you want to be successful as a Christian, if you want to be successful as in your marriage, if you want to be successful with your kids, if you want to be successful in work, if you want to be successful in sport, it's the same guiding principles, you know, living life to the full, going into strict training, you know, these same verses, these same things we learn, being open, the same things, working at something with all of your heart, the same principles that you have are equal. So if you just focus on being a better person, being a better Christian, if it's changing, continue to self-transform, then I think that will make you better, all those things. So you get to go to heaven, you get to meet God, and on the way you get to have an amazing no regrets life.
anything you would say, offer as a warning, anything you say, if there's one thing you need to avoid, it's this. Any traps, obstacles, anything that looking back, you go, boy, watch out for this area.
Yeah. I think that the world lies about work, and a profession like architecture is one where most people who are architects believe that the most important thing in life is architecture. They're like they're like Christians, it's just art, the god of architecture is there, and and I think too many Christians fall for that crazy lie that that society is peddling us, and work is peddling us. So I think that's a big one, is understand how important work is, which it has an importance, and understand how to work at it and do it well. But it's only and I think prioritize. No, I have written down my priorities in a list, and I look back at that list. It was really when I got it really wrong, and my real priority, if you looked at it, and in reality, was work. And so when my boss said there's a client meeting in Algeria next week, you need to be there, I was fine, even though that was missing my son's birthday for the second year in a row. Now, there was no way I should have done that. That's me getting my priorities totally wrong. And I think we need to say, everybody needs to work out what their priorities are, and then hold to those tenets in life. So it's God, your spouse, if you have one, your children, if you've got one, church, and I think there's a difference in God and church. Your health should be there, your parents should be there, and then maybe it's work, or maybe it's your home, and then maybe your hobbies and things like that. People need to know what your priorities are, and I mean, I've looked from my own mistake, and then make sure you keep to those.
Yeah, great advice. Well, James, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me. And I certainly am inspired to see you go from that young, smiling young man with so much passion and fulfill God's purpose for your life and continue to grow into your 50s. And I know 30 years from now, if we're both still alive, I know you'll still be on the same track. And it's very inspiring to watch it. Thank you for sharing today. Thank you so much for listening to the Rob Skinner Podcast. If you're enjoying it, please let me ask you a favor. Tell your friends. Tell them how to find it. Let your church friends and your family know. Please spread the word. Because my goal is to inspire you to make this life count, live a no-regrets life, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Have a great day and make this life count.